government officials actually thought were probably aiding the enemy in their efforts, actually, use the mafia to combat them.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. Hey, do me a favor. If you're on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell for the notifications. And if you're listening on Spotify, make sure you do that 5-star. Today's guest is Matthew Black. He's a journalist, crime historian too, correct?
That's right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the author of a killer book, Operation Underworld, How the Mafia and the U.S. government teamed up to win World War II. Matthew, thanks so much, brother, for joining me today on Everyday BS. I deeply appreciate it, my friend.
Yeah, happy to be here, John.
So let me ask you this, my friend. What drove you into like researching and getting into World War II?
Well, World War II, I mean, I think that started really early on. Like, I don't know, when I was a kid, and I'm talking really young kid, like earliest memories, my parents didn't shy away from, showing me war movies or any rated R movies, and I really loved those. And my dad was super into, the History Channel, watching those old black and white documentaries. And so I grew up really loving those. And, World War II is just, I mean, so expansive. I mean, you really get an idea of just how, large of an event that it was when you spend decades researching it and you still find new things, that you had no idea about.
I myself, I am a huge World War II buff. Actually, for Christmas this year, my wife got me something really cool. She purchased me a ration coin from, yeah, man, came with a certificate of authenticity. And I tell you what, man, this thing is no bigger than a button. And this is what you would cash in to get cheese, bread, meat, a food ration coin. And these things were phenomenal. And they're so tiny. And that little tiny piece of metal was worth so much to people back then.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's amazing. I mean, you think about something that probably really rare, and it was super prolific back then. I mean, there must have been thousands or millions of those,
Yeah. So that, where'd you grow up? Where are you from originally?
Yeah, from Seattle area, up in the Pacific Northwest. Yeah, born and raised, went to school there, went to the University of Washington, got my history degree there. And I live in San Diego now. Been down here for about 7 years. So
nice.
Follow the warm weather.
Yeah, right. It's warm out today. It was cold this morning here in Florida, but as I got to the shop here, it heated up pretty quick. Now, Washington's a beautiful state. I got up there to visit a couple of years ago. I have some friends that have a car club, and just not too far from Mount Rainier. And let me tell you, man, that's some beautiful, beautiful country, and just the mountains in general are to die for out there, man. Your book, Operation Underworld, depicts the mafia and the U.S. government coming together and forming, like, I guess you could say, an alliance. Am I correct?
Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. That's right.
How big of a part was this during the war?
Well, I don't want to give the impression that it was integral to winning the war, but at the beginning of the conflict, or at least at the beginning of the U.S. involvement in World War II, we were terribly vulnerable on the home front.
Right.
And as we know, from studying World War II, we know that America's home front wasn't, under as much threat as, say, Britain, or certainly France, which was taken over. But the real threat to the United States existed on the docks and on the shores, and our ability to run commerce on the high seas over to Europe was deeply compromised by German U-boats. And the biggest problem was that the feeling was that these U-boats were being so effective that they were getting help from mainland United States. And the mafia, who government officials actually thought were probably aiding the enemy in their efforts, actually, used the mafia to combat them.
So,
And
so they thought that the mafia was working with the Germans.
that's right. Yeah, the naval intelligence, determined that these U-boats who were operating just outside of our ports, they couldn't be, they couldn't do it if they were operating from their sub pens in France. It was too long of a journey. They didn't have enough fuel to make the journey, so they had to be getting fuel from somewhere. And the reason why they thought of the mafia is because they had run a similar mission before. They pictured fast boats coming from the mainland of the United States and rendezvousing with these U-boats out at sea, and maybe paying a fee for fuel, food, and water. And the reason why intelligence officials thought of the mafia, like I said, they had run this mission before during Prohibition. So when ships would come from like Scotland or England, these fast boats would come out, and they would meet these boats like just beyond the 3 mile international waters boundary, and they would offload all that booze or molasses, what have you, onto those
Right.
speedboats. They would run the gauntlet of the U.S. Coast Guard, to get back to shore. So they saw this mission as like this could be going on right now, so they needed
Now,
to get it.
now a lot of this ran from, I guess, the docks in New York, correct?
Yeah, that's pretty much, I would say, the central setting of the story, definitely.
Okay. Now, the mob at the time. So this, I guess, this is around 1942-ish.
That's right. Yeah, early 42.
Yeah, they're trying to bring this together. Who was the head guy in the government that was like, all right, we got to figure something out. We need to get some of our own intelligence and look to the docks and find out, all right, who can we trust? Who can we use to get, some eyes out and about?
Sure, sure. Well, the threat had existed since even before U.S. involvement in the war, and it was kind of assumed that the docks might be swarming with spies and, enemy saboteurs. And the U.S. government also was insecure about the longshoremen who were on those docks. These are the men who are handling the war materials that are going to fight Nazi Germany. And the U.S. government is very suspicious of them, and the reason is because most of them are immigrants.
Right.
They didn't speak English, or they pretended to not speak English if an authority figure came by. Playing D&D, deaf and dumb.
Yeah.
Right. And so they knew the threat existed, but there wasn't really much they can do. And then a major event happened where this ship called the Normandy. It was a cruise liner. But then we took it over, and we were outfitting it to be a troop carrying ship.
Okay. So we would take our guys overseas using this ship.
Exactly. Tens of thousands of soldiers it could take over. And it was also really fast, so it could outrun any U-boats that were chasing
Oh,
it.
no. Yeah, really?
Right. And so this was one of the most important ships in the Atlantic at the time. It was the second largest ship in the entire world. When you think about the large ships that came out of World War II, and this was how big this thing is. It was even bigger than Titanic. And so this is where the book starts. Actually, is this event? It's anchored on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and all of a sudden, a terrible fire breaks out on the top deck of the ship, and just the entire ship is consumed in flames. And hundreds of firefighters descend on the scene, and the ones that had the most success were these fire ships, like Navy boats.
Yeah.
And they were firing their water, onto the deck, at an arc, and they successfully extinguished the blaze, but they hurled so much water on board, it collected below decks and actually managed to capsize the ship. So the ship was lost. And not only was it lost in an extremely public fashion. Everybody in the city saw the smoke. The smoke settled in the city, the next day it was there. The side of that ship, on its side, I mean, imagine how big that thing is, 100 feet bigger than Titanic. On its side, and it's like a symbol, for what's going on, because everybody assumed that it was saboteurs who took out the ship, and that ship ended up having to stay there for years. So it was a constant reminder. That event really set things in motion for Operation Underworld, where the High Command was like, we have to figure out how to secure these docks. We must find a way. So Naval Intelligence was given the task, and that's where one of the main characters of the story really comes into play, Commander Charles Haffenden.
Okay.
He was a section commander, investigative unit in Naval Intelligence. And with his team of about 160 investigators, they started descending on the docks of New York. And they started talking to people. Nobody would talk back to them, nobody at all. So they went to the district attorney's office to get some help. And they wanted to know how they could approach these men. Because one of the things that they had determined was the leaders of these dock workers were union officials, but in New York and in those docks, those union officials were typically associated with what we know as the mafia.
Yeah.
Right. So they knew that they needed to talk to these people, but they didn't really know how to do it. So then they went to the Naval Intelligence, went to the district attorney's office of New York. That's where it was revealed to Naval Intelligence that the mafia, not only were they probably not aiding the enemy, they were probably more than eager to help the United States in their cause.
Yeah, you just can't walk up to be like, yo, man, where's your boss at?
Yeah, no, truly. So, that was an interesting learning, that the mafia would be so, gung-ho to help the United States government, in this task. But, obviously, there were some mutual benefits there to an alliance with each other.
So one of the big names from the mobsters that helped out with the government was apparently Charles Lucky Luciano.
That's right. Yeah, right. He was, largely credited with starting Cosa Nostra. Which there's some truth to that, especially in organizing it and the structure that we've come to know it as.
Yeah, the five families and all that stuff.
Right, certainly. And so he's the head of one of the families, and he's the head of the commission of the five families. So he's he's the man. And the thing is, though, he's in jail when this story starts. And
that's
how can he help? If he's in jail, but such was his influence that he could exert that from a prison cell. And so he was brought into the fold. After a few months of having some success in the docks, making some infiltrations, gathering some intelligence, some undercover agents in various sections, on the docks, they realized that the contacts that they had made, they could only get so far. Some Italians were still skeptical. There's a whole Irish side. There are Irish docks, and the Italian mafia didn't have a lot of influence over those people. It's still kind of at the end of gangs New York style. There's
yes
territories, so it's suggested that Luciano be brought in on the project because, and the quote is that they needed somebody who could snap the whip on the underworld, on the entire underworld. And so when he's brought into the fold, such was his influence that all of a sudden the Irish are starting to cooperate on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Native Italians who are a little more skeptical are starting to cooperate. Then, of course, the Italian Americans who are associated with the American mafia, they really start to kick it into high gear and start helping out a lot. So, yeah, his influence was pretty major.
Was there any other cities along the dock areas, such as like Pennsylvania, like Philadelphia, things like that? Were they involved as well with some of this? Because I know in Philadelphia, we had the Navy Yard. Mm-hmm. and whatnot. Was there any type of mob related things helping from those points too?
Yes, yeah, there was. It's probably just about what material is available. So most of it takes place in New York. But like, for example, there's a gangster named Joe Socks Lanza. He gets Socks as his nickname because he socks anybody who disagrees with him. Big bruiser of a dude.
Right.
He's called the czar of the Fulton Fish Market. And the Fulton Fish Market was the biggest fish market in the entire world at the time. It was on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and he was the man there. He ran all the unions, all the rackets, that were in there. And the union that he was associated with, that he was a business agent for, was the United Seafood Workers Union. And through his contacts with these unions, he went on a road trip through New England and most of the East Coast, and stopped in various cities that, like Philly and other ones, and just basically talked to those union members who knew, who were affiliated with the mafia, and just said, hey, this is what we're looking for. There may be some people who are coming up here, and if I tell you to help them, I need you to help them. This would be the Navy. And he's like, come down to New York and I'll get you back. Like over 2 weeks, he visited like 12 different cities and kind of spread the word that way.
Now, with the information that you've researched, how hard was it for you to dive deep into finding exact and like, okay, this shit really happened type of information?
Yeah, well, it was really tough. I don't want to give away the ending too much, but one of the reasons why you haven't heard about the story till now, or maybe you didn't know a lot about it until you read the book, is because there was a massive cover-up. At the end of it, after the war was over, the Navy wanted to save themselves any embarrassment for having allied with the worst criminals in the country. Public enemy number one. So the only reason why any information actually does exist is because there was an investigation years after the fact, in the early 1950s, and it was called the Hurlins investigation. I'll try to make a long story short, but Thomas Dewey was the district attorney special prosecutor in Manhattan, and he's responsible for taking down Lucky Luciano.
Okay.
Fast forward 10 years, Dewey is now the governor of New York State, and Luciano's in prison because of that, that instance.
Okay.
Because of his help in the war effort, Luciano is pardoned by Dewey. Okay. And then this brings up a whole slew of conspiracy theories that Dewey was paid off to get Luciano out of prison. So Dewey commissions this investigation on his own, using his own dime. He commissions this to prove that Luciano had indeed helped with the war effort, and that's why he was pardoned, not because he was paid off. Well, the irony is that this investigation concluded, and the Navy got their hands on it, and they said, we can't let the public see this. We're going to have to classify this. So Dewey's investigation was not revealed to the public until decades after his death, which is kind of sad, in that regard. His name was never really cleared of these charges, even though they were ridiculous until the end. So the Hurlins investigation is 3,000 pages of testimony, and it's contained in the archives of Rochester University in New York, which I had fully anticipated that I was going to have to spend a heck of a lot of time there. Archives are not so forthcoming, with their information. You have to go there, to get it. Now, fortunately, this is a unfortunately sort of thing. My project started right at the beginning of the pandemic. And I can't speak for a lot of archives, but I can tell you the one at Rochester, I give a lot of praise. Nobody could go into those archives. So they were fulfilling digital requests, and they were scanning documents that people requested, and they'd send them out. So it took a year to get all not all 3,000 pages, but just about all of it. And that was really the meat, of the material, that served for the book. So
is that through, like, what is it, the Freedom of Information Act and stuff
this investigation had been declassified through the Freedom of Information Act some decades before. And one of the reasons I think it's not as well known is because a book was written about this when the report was declassified. It's called the Luciano Project. It's not a very good book.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I kind of also I've never really explored this, but I kind of have this theory that maybe in kind of the late 70s, a lot of these World War II classified, a lot of the classified material was being declassified. You're about 20-25 years. That's generally the statute of limitations on those. So maybe there was some kind of fatigue, with that regard. There's a lot of stuff that got revealed in that era, and nobody really picked it up, So
What I find fascinating is that they didn't want anybody to know that the mob was helping,
right.
but yet, you fast forward now with all the freedom. Annie Jacobson's book, Operation Paperclip. Have you read that?
Well, I know of Operation Paperclip.
Yeah. So I can understand where they were coming from with that, where we have all these horrific Nazi scientists who were doing all these experiments, and then we bring them here to the States and we give them jobs. And the next thing you know, we have NASA. It's basically what it comes down to. But I mean, you have these guys who, okay, the mob, I guess, like, all right, we'll help you guys. We're going to help you fight what's going on overseas. Now, when they help fight the Nazis in some sense, in what type of, are they traveling? Are they spying? Are they hanging close to the shoreline? Are they getting deep into, like, going to Italy and taking trips of that nature?
Right. So the story starts, as I mentioned, in New York. Starts and ends in New York, but there it definitely goes some places. The thing is maybe you put this together, but it seems like obvious thing, but it did actually take the high command a little bit of time to put it together. But here we are at war with Italy, and the United States has a massive Italian population. We have
Right.
more Italians than any other place in the world except for Italy. And so it dawns on us that this could be used for intelligence. Now, Italy had been largely closed off to the West since the 20s, because Mussolini had been in power that long, but he had been booting out people for a long time. And one of the factions that he targeted was organized crime. And, he was trying to get rid of the mafiosi in Italy. And a lot of those people ended up in the United States. And so, these are fantastic people to talk to. And the best people to talk to that they found were ones who had worked in the docks, in the harbors in Italy recently. And so the mafia kind of goes on this big quest to bring in anyone and everyone who's been to Italy recently. Naval intelligence, kind of broadens the net, and they're like, anybody with postcards or books about the area or photographs, like, we want to see those. And so one of the contacts that's made through Luciano is actually influential, highly influential in the battle for Sicily. And there's 4 New York officers who were part of Operation Underworld who were plucked right out of there and given advanced commando training and intelligence training. And they were part of the first wave of assault troops that landed on Gela and Licata Beach in Sicily.
So are you talking police officers?
Yeah, well, they were police officers. And then, Operation Underworld, one of the things about it is a lot of these gentlemen are a little older. Anybody who's young is carrying a rifle and is fighting on a beach or in some distant land. But these guys are more like your 35, 40-year-olds, but they still want to contribute to the war effort. So they were mostly police officers, lawyers, district attorneys, private investigators, you name it, because they're going into an investigative arm of naval intelligence. So these guys were, and part of Operation Underworld is intelligence officers taken right out. You can speak Italian, you're in shape, and you've got contacts that we want to know about. So these officers land in the first wave, and one of them is able to. They start going into town because people are hiding. They're terrified. They start going into town, speaking Italian, like, "Hey, it's okay, come out. We're not going to shoot you." And they end up finding a contact of Luciano's there. And this person gives them information, and it's instrumental in taking a major facility for the Italian Naval Command Center was taken by these soldiers based on information that was gleaned from contacts, from Lucky Luciano back in New York. So it does have quite a profound effect on the battle itself in Europe.
In the movies, they always portray there's always still that strong connection from, the mobsters back home in the States to the mobsters that are back in the home country, right? Is that actual with what's going on here? Are they able to connect with people back home and be like, hey, we're coming, we need you to do this, this, and this, and we're going to be there? So
yeah, and the instances are not many where that occurred. In fact, a lot of the contacts that these gentlemen were able to obtain were kind of done in North Africa. That's where their commando training was, and
okay,
there was still kind of a current of people who were riding between the lines of the Axis and the Allies, and they were able to get some information from these. But there was a specific instance where it was I think it was Luciano's cousin had been smuggled out of the country into Italy, so that was a person to contact, and he was pretty influential in his town. So, and then there's been tons of rumors ever since. There's a rumor that Luciano parachuted into Sicily. Another where he's he's riding in a tank and it's got the letter L or something like that, and this garrison surrendered. It's just there's a lot of fabrications that the man was in New York in a jail cell when it all went down.
What ends up happening with Luciano? I mean, since the Navy wanted to keep this all kind of like a secret, I mean, I can't remember the history of him that much. More of a different type of follower of World War II, not with the mob involved, but it's very fascinating. And I know you don't want to give a bunch of your book away, but it's did he end up being deported?
Right. Yeah. And, it's an interesting thing throughout the book, because when his friends, Meyer Lansky is another name I'll name drop, the mob accountants, he was Luciano's best friend and was kind of influential in getting him involved in Operation Underworld, suggesting that, he's someone that they could use. When he comes to Luciano with the idea, I mean, you would think he would jump at it like, okay, yeah, I'll help, and I'll get out of here early. It sounds great. Well, they didn't come to him with a deal. They're like, this is part of your patriotic duty. You're not getting any time off for this. And that's the thing they did with all of these mobsters. A lot of them were under indictment at the time, including Sox Lanza, who I previously mentioned. They didn't get deals. This is, America needs you. It's time to step up. But Luciano, in his case, he's done about 10 years of a 30 to 50 year sentence. So he's got a lot of time in front of him. But the problem he's facing is that he's got a deportation warrant on him as well. So if he gets out of jail, if he's successful in getting out of jail through legal means, either paroled, pardoned, or just serving out a sentence, it's very likely that he's just going to be deported at the end of it.
Yeah, they're going to take him right to the docks.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so he's like, I can't help the United States in the war effort get out of prison, and then you guys boot me off to Italy. I'll get lynched. That's just not smart. So it took some convincing to get him involved, and through it eventually, well after the war is over, he does get pardoned through Dewey, who I mentioned before. And sure enough, Dewey kicks him out of the country, and he's forced to live in Italy. He makes some efforts to try and get back to New York City, and that's kind of where the book ends. But tough break for him. He finally gets out of jail, and he came over to the United States when he was 6 years old. So the United States was his home,
right?
So, or New York City, for that matter, especially.
Now for yourself, how did this all come to mind for you? Like, were you just sitting around the house and like, what, man, I want to put this together. How do I, how'd you come about wanting to do this?
Well, I feel like that's how a lot of ideas start, right? But they also kind of die on the vine, so to speak. And in this case, I had a bit of extra motivation. So, it was early on in the pandemic, and I had, I lost my job in like the first month of the pandemic. It was early casualty, and riding high in those, the government, money, for a little while. But
you're not lying. I mean, they gave out so much freaking money. Nobody wanted to go back to work. And
here I am. I'm like, I know the the gravy train's gonna it's gonna end. So so to speak, and I'm getting there's some anxiety kind of building about what I want to do. What's going to be available, and I wrote this article about how Vladimir Putin was going to be invading Eastern Europe, but I couldn't sell it to anybody, and then a year later, 2 years later, he does that very thing. So anyway, I'm going through that, and then I get hit up on LinkedIn from a writer. Her name is Julie Checkaway. She's a New York Times bestseller, and she said that she had read an article I wrote about Operation Underworld. I had previously worked at a digital history magazine. That was actually the job I lost.
Okay.
Pandemic, and so this article had been written a few years before, and she found it and really loved it. And so she contacted me and said, I work with an agent, and we're always looking for new writers to write books. We think this would be a fantastic story. Would you like to write it? I'm like, let me think. Yeah, okay. And John, like to know me, like a book that involves World War II, the mafia, and the Navy. I mean, you couldn't have a more Matthew Black.
You're getting all the goodies in one shot.
Right. Checks a lot of boxes for sure. It'll be a difficult one to follow up that checks so many of those boxes. So anyway, it was a really wonderful experience because she worked with me through the proposal process. Thank God, because we sent the proposal out, I think, to 8 or 10 different publishing houses, and only one accepted it. But the book has turned out to be a really, really great success. It's still selling off the shelves, and I'm hoping very much it's there's been a script written about it for a movie, and it's being shopped right now. I hope it turns into
I was just thinking, I'm like, man, this is going to be a hell of a movie if they
right. Yeah, I'm hoping so very much. I always kind of pictured it in that sense, and in my writing style, if you pick up the book, if your audience picks up the book, it's very vivid. I'm trying to create a scene, that you can see, you can smell, you feel it, and hopefully that translates to the big screen.
Let me ask you, what was the real occurrence with the SS Normandy? What happened with that in actuality?
Well, so there's what I deem to be an untrue story, and just about every other historian agrees that there's a story where Luciano actually ordered the Normandy to be burned because they knew that it would spark naval intelligence to use the mafia as a resource. So have you ever heard of Alberto Anastasia,
Yeah.
The Lord High Executioner of the mafia? Well, the rumor is that he was the one who started the fire in the ship, and that's what led to the mafia involvement. But there's been multiple investigations of what occurred on that boat, and the most likely thing that did happen was that it was probably just an accident, from all the work, that was being done on the ship to retrofit it, into a troop carrying ship. But the feeling prevailed throughout the war, and even it permeated naval intelligence. I mean, they had an investigation that concluded that it was probably an accident, but that didn't stop their efforts anymore, because they had to ask the question, can we ensure that this won't happen again? And the answer was no. So they had to take steps to make sure that was the case.
Let's backtrack a little bit, Matt, if you don't mind. Yeah. So you get this call from her, and it's during the pandemic, and everybody is shutting down left and right.
Right.
How are you going about finding the proper information and everything like that you need to make sure that you get all the information from certain archives and whatnot, that they're not letting anybody in anywhere? So how are you going about doing this?
Yeah, sure. Well, in the instance of the Herland's investigation at Rochester University, I just got extremely lucky, that they were willing to work with me, in that regard. in other instances with, excuse me, like FBI files, things that the government, documents and investigations, those can be obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests, and those are all. Well, I don't know. Maybe they could still be done by mail, but but they're done digitally these days.
What's that?
Right? Yeah. And so that was how I got a number of them, and there was an instance where I was trying to get Commander Haffenden's his file in the Navy. That's public information for anyone. But they were so backed up with requests during the pandemic. I actually only got it 2 months ago.
Really?
Yeah. I was like, oh man.
Literally 2 months ago.
Literally 2 months ago. I filled out that request, two or 3 years ago. And I just got it. And I was like, really eager to look at it. I'm like, oh crap. Like, if there's something awesome in here that didn't get put in the book, I'll never forgive myself. Fortunately, there really wasn't much in there at all. So,
there's a lot of people just sitting around the houses like, hey, you know what? I'm going to write me a book and I'm start putting out all this stuff.
Yeah, I know exactly. Start filling out those requests now. Yeah. It may take a while. Now, I think their offices had shut down for a little while, and they weren't fulfilling requests. But they're like, "Go ahead and submit it. We'll we'll get to it eventually." But so
now,
but yeah, I mean, and then other stuff. Secondary source material is easy enough. Just
gotcha. You get everything situated, and you're starting to go on this, and thankfully, the internet, you got that, so you're able to kind of research some stuff through the internet and everything like that. Did you come across anything that was just like you were like, holy crap, man, this is like, wow?
Yeah, I think I had a few of those moments during, mainly from the Herland's investigation. Like other authors have come through that, but I was pretty sure, like they all they told the same story.
Okay.
Like clearly they're just recycling the information out of there. So I'm like, there's more. There's got to be more. And so like, it was really cool deconstructing like Luciano's visitors during Operation Underworld. So, here's this mob boss. He's up in Dannemora prison, which is near the Canadian border. They call it Little Siberia. It's got to be one of the worst places. It still exists. It's got to be a terrible place to do time. Then he gets moved to this place called Great Meadows, and just the name alone suggests that it's a better place. But
it almost looks like a retirement home,
Great Meadows, yeah, exactly. So, but anyway, like one of the amazing things about it is like he's this convicted mob boss, and he becomes part of Operation Underworld, and all of a sudden he's given access to his entire network. And as long as they say that they're visiting him under the premise of this Navy operation, he's getting free reign. He's talking to his capos, his lieutenants, and when you look at the list, I think that was the holy crap moment. Like you could see that some were aliases, but then names pop up like Bugsy Siegel.
The list of people coming to see him in jail.
Yeah, exactly. Like Frank Costello and Willie Moretti. These are kind of the top guys at the time. And to think like somebody like that is allowed to meet these people, is just pretty incredible, because that of course they talked Operation Underworld, but it was probably more like, yeah, do what you got to do, use my name, go ahead. And then they get to talk, for hours on end about whatever they want to talk about. And so I think it just, when you take what little tidbits of information that you do have about what the mafia is doing, like, for example, Frank Costello came and visited them, or visited Luciano in the month of August. What is Costello doing in the month of August? Well, he's always in Saratoga at the racetrack in the month of August, running the casino there, the sports book. So he just, tacked that on to, to that trip, so it's kind of just, gives a little window into what their business was, and becomes very clear that, especially, after the initial visits, that Luciano was very much plotting how to get out of prison. That's what it was. It was his lawyer.
Now,
and Fred Meyer Lansky, who were visiting him the most.
Let me ask you, how long did the Navy work with these guys in general?
Yeah, so Operation Underworld is largely concluded by I want to say mid 1943. The threat to our ships is no longer as great. We've got our convoy system in place. The U-boat, the battles at sea are happening farther and farther out in the Atlantic, so they're no longer happening in our ports. And then once we invade Sicily, that's really when it comes to an end, because Operation Underworld goes through this shift about midway through to where they're trying to protect the home front, and then they're trying to prepare for the invasion of Sicily. Once the invasion of Sicily occurs, all of a sudden, all these contacts who were valuable in the United States, these Italian contacts who had information about Sicily, they're no longer as relevant anymore, because you got troops on the ground now in Sicily. You got aerial reconnaissance. You got the place surrounded with boats. You don't need these people giving you, tips anymore. So that's kind of where it ends. And it's interesting though, because there's a ripple with that. And I'll just tell a little aside because it's kind of cool that, Commander Haffenden, he's in his early 50s, and Operation Underworld was this big moment in his life. But he probably realizes that nobody's ever going to hear about it, he doesn't want to be sedentary. He doesn't want to just ride a desk till the end of the war. So he volunteers for the only combat job that's available to men in their 50s, and that's beach masters. So when the troops land in a marine invasion, an amphibious assault, these beach masters run up on the beach. They turn their back to all the machine guns and mortar fire, that the enemy's hurling at them, and they start directing traffic. They start directing our troops somewhere to go. And so he takes on this job, and by the time he takes on the job, there's only a couple battles left. And so he actually ends up fighting at Iwo Jima.
Really?
Yeah, and it's just really cool that a book, that's about the mafia in New York City. You get to go to you get to experience the landings at Sicily. You get to experience landings at Iwo Jima, and Commander Haffinden's experience there, where he was wounded and received a Purple Heart, and had a pretty dangerous mission there as well. So it continues in various ways beyond 1943, and then of course there's the playing out of Luciano trying to gain his freedom and get back to New York City and reclaim his throne.
That's pretty wild, man, that he ended up, he's like, you know what, if I'm going to go out, I'm going to go out and in a blaze of glory in some sense. Holy crap, man. Have you seen the series, the Pacific?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I really love that because they follow Sergeant Basilone, who's just an incredible soldier, and then Lepke, first name anyway. Yeah, who's the guy who wrote With the Old Breed? I'm blanking on his name right now, but that's one of the best war memoirs I've ever read. It's incredible.
Yeah. He ended up, what did he do? He came home and he ended up writing sports again for the local paper and whatnot. And I thought, that series really was phenomenal. I'm a huge fan of the series, The Band of Brothers. I can watch that over and over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. And I have, and I will. And but there was, I guess there was a little behind the scenes of some of the guys from Band of Brothers, where they ended up taking a tour over to Germany, and they went to Bastogne, and it was old Garnier, and I think it was Babe Heffron. And to this day, they still have the impacts from all the shelling in the woods along that wood line of Bastogne. It's freaking unbelievable.
Yeah, that's nuts. That's really great. Have you seen have you watched Masters of the Air? It just came out. So
that's on my list. I have not. I actually just caught a little glimpse of it through my feed online, and I was like, another good series to follow.
Yeah, I was super skeptical of it after the first episode. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Memphis Belle back in
Yeah.
1990. It kind of seemed like a rip off of that movie, but then I don't know, it got really good. The
That was
characters
with
were good.
Matthew Broderick. Is that
Matthew Modine.
okay? Okay.
Yeah. Mhm.
And you said it was a little skeptic at first.
Yeah, I was. It seemed like they were kind of following a lot of the same dangers, threats, plot lines, that movie. But then it really it diverges into a more or develops into a more complex story, and the characters are really good. What's the game? Austin Butler, is that his name? He's really
Okay.
yeah, he's really great in it. So
Yeah, the anything that's got to do with that stuff, man, it's just mind blowing, and you know, excuse me. The thing that bothers me, I'll be 50 this year, and I'm an old soul and a young body still in some sense, But I was raised. My grandfather, he was a vet. I ended up joining the service myself. I was in the Army.
great.
And thanks, brother. I appreciate that. And my grandfather, he was in the Army, but he did his service on a submarine, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah,
How
wow.
that happened, I don't know.
I mean, submarine duty is just, I don't, must be quite a difference between, a modern sub and a World War II sub. But, I mean, submarine duty is also, reserved for the best, right? It's
Yeah.
you got to be in the top 10%, and then you got to volunteer for it.
Like I said, I grew up in Philadelphia, so I used to spend a lot of time downtown Philadelphia, and we go to Penn's Landing. At Penn's Landing, you could tour the old USS Olympia and the submarine that they had there and whatnot, which was really, really cool because, man, those cramped quarters, brother, let me tell you, holy crap. I don't know how they did that stuff, but, man, you got to give props to where props are due for those guys.
Definitely.
And they were young, man, when they went over. And a lot of these kids, they lied about their age. They faked their age at 16, 15 years old to go overseas to fight for something that they believed in. And it just having to see what they went through and whatnot. It's just, it's unbelievable.
It is. And I think one of the things I've been kind of, just kind of blowing my mind recently is just how young their leaders were.
Yeah.
These guys were just incredible response. I mean, you talk about, submarines, those captains were no more than 30 years old, these guys flying fortresses, and masters, they're 25, 26 years old, and have just enormous responsibility put on their shoulders. It's incredible.
It is truly, truly crazy. So you finally get your book finished and you get it all ready to go. And you said one publishing company. And
Right.
what was going through your mind when that come through for you?
Well, gosh, it all felt so much like it was meant to be, but I don't know. You get a little older, get a little more skeptical, and you start to have a lot of doubts, if it's really going to come through. And I just felt like, if I write the best damn book I possibly can, then this thing will be a success. And one of the things that I learned early on, as well as I was writing it, is that this is a good story. Stay the hell out of its way. Okay.
Right.
A lot of writers might want to try to do too much with the story. This is like, just tell it because it's awesome. So that was kind of my thinking. And then I got in a part-time job. The money wasn't, great because there was no competition. You know what I mean? And so I got a part-time job, and, that turned into something, good. And then, it was nice when I was doing research and stuff. It worked well. But then when it came time to write the book, I'm getting, like 2 months to my deadline. I'm halfway through, but I want to start over. So I'm kind of freaking out, and I'm just like, okay, I need to quit my job. Like, I have to. This is the only way it's going to get done. So I talked to my boss, and I was like, look, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. I have to do this. I'm so sorry. And I lived probably the healthiest couple of months of my life. Like, if I'm going to do this the best that I can, I'm going to be, I'm going to get sleep. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to not drink. I'm going to, just, get my mind in the best shape, possible. Because this is the opportunity I've been waiting for forever. So I really owe it to myself to give it everything I can, and I think that ended up being the right decision, especially because, when I was done, I was able to go and get my old job back. So,
Well,
but yeah,
I mean, plus, right? That's a big plus there.
yeah, for sure. But, I don't know. You ask yourself, how committed are you to this thing? Do you know it needs to get done? Are you willing to do it? And, it was, I guess, in the end of the day, easy decision, but, not a, I don't know. It's just kind of a big thing to be confronted with. So
I had another author on my podcast a few months back by the name of Andrew Couch, and Andrew put out a book called "The Moron at the End of This Book," and it's just a book of stories that he did through his life, and we got talking about it, and he's like, I didn't know how to write a book, and I just like, I wouldn't even know where to begin. I give you guys the most upright respect and credit you could possibly get for sitting down and focusing and looking at each word and putting it together and how you're going to lay it down and how to crisscross this and crisscross that to make this amazing story come to life. I mean, you guys, you do a hell of a job.
I appreciate that. Well, hopefully, it's entertaining for you all. Like, there's, I've obviously spent a lot of time in school and at studies, so I know the value of that. But there's also kind of the Tarantino method where he's just like, just watch it, and try to,
right.
You can glean a lot just from watching all those, all these movies. So
now, what other works do you have that you have put out along with Operation Underworld?
Yeah, I have a book called Dave Beck, A Teamster's Life. It's about a Teamsters, the labor union, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters.
Yeah.
It's about the president of the Teamsters right before Jimmy Hoffa.
So,
he ends up getting, going to jail because of a government commission and everything, but, not quite as interesting as the Jimmy Hoffa story. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, right.
And then I have some things in the works that I'm, hoping will be coming out in the next year or two. Starting shopping around my second book, which is kind of a different topic, and then I recently got into a screenplay opportunity, which is a little more on the same topic. We'll be talking about the mafia in Cuba.
Okay.
Post World War II, and one of the reasons why I'm being summoned to write it is because it's kind of where Operation Underworld ends.
Well, there was a big thing with the mob going to Cuba during that time, especially for like casinos and whatnot. Like,
that's right. Yeah, it was for a time. It was supposed to be the Las Vegas of the
right.
United States, and Castro ended up ruining any plans of that. But that was since Cuba is so close to the United States, that was Luciano's kind of idea to set up a headquarters there and then use it as a springboard to get back to the United States. And that's one of the last scenes of the book, is the great summit meeting at the Hotel Nacional, where every mafia boss in the United States, came to have a meeting. There's only been maybe one or two instances where a meeting like that ever occurred. So it's a pretty cool scene.
So your book, you finish it, it gets published, you're out and about. How do you feel when you walk into a store and you see it just sitting there in a pile, ready to go?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's pretty surreal. I don't know how to describe it yet. I've really tried to stay grounded with it, but it's just a wonderful thing, to see it, because it is just a lot of hard work, and it's just so different than other work I've done, or a lot of work that people do where you're friends with somebody, but you don't see the outcome, the end product of their work, a lot of times. So it's, it's kind of like it's out there. I'm naked.
Well, if it makes you feel good, I went to pick it up the other day. I stopped at Barnes and Noble, and it was sold out. So
right on. That's
not in there, but So.
I was surprised to see that it kind of sales were good at the beginning. It came out around Christmas 2022, and then it went low, and then around Christmas, this last Christmas, it just shot up, and it's maintained. So I'm pretty happy with that, because that tells me that the people who are buying now are the ones who heard from somebody else,
Right.
that the book might have been good. So
I tell you what, man, that is our best advertising is word of mouth. And
I
that's
know, right.
it's worked that way for years and it'll continue to work that way.
Mhm.
Now, where can people get your book now?
Yeah, it's still on Amazon. It's available in hardback. I don't think we're going to be releasing the paperback version for a little while because people keep buying the hardbacks. So, and of course, it's available on Kindle as well. So,
Yeah.
on Amazon. So,
Yeah, I'll put the links to all that stuff in the description on this podcast as well.
If you get the chance to buy local, please buy local. But Amazon, of course, will be your backup.
Yeah. Now, you had mentioned you got a few other things in the works, so we should be keeping our eyes open for that and seeing what's happening.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Yeah, please do. And maybe we'll get a chance to talk about that sometime.
Awesome. Matt, I want to thank you so much for jumping on with me this morning and during this total eclipse. And
that's right. Yep, it's coming. Total eclipse of the heart.
Yes, right. And thank you so much from the bottom of my heart, man. I appreciate it and much respect. And your book is, from what I've read on it and everything like that, I'm definitely picking one up. Thank you once again for everything and for jumping on with us. And I deeply appreciate it. And like I said, I'll have the links to all your contact and info and stuff like that and where to get your book in the description on this podcast.
Great. That's wonderful. Well, it's been a pleasure, John. Yeah, anytime.
Awesome. Matt, thanks again, brother. Take care of yourself and I'll talk soon.
You do the same. Take care.
All right, brother.